Hello, guys and girls. With the end of 2019 and the decade fast approaching, this is Bored Now, and this is going to be the first of my end of 2019 list videos. And this is going to be my top 10 movies of 2019. So over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be posting these list videos. I'm going to do a similar video for my favourite movies for my favourite TV shows of the year. So that'll be the next video. So a top 10 TV shows of 2019 based on what I've seen. Also, because it's coming up to Christmas, tis the season and all that, I'll also be doing a top 10 Christmas movies video, so you can expect that coming up soon. I also do TV episodes of the year as well. And also, because it is the end of the decade, I'm going to do a couple of special videos that will be my top 20 television shows of the decade, and also my top 20 films of the last decade. So those special videos to mark the end of this decade. So lots to get your teeth sunk into, or my teeth, and you can join along at home. So if you have lists, if you want to pick your top 10 movies of this year, like I've done on this video, then please let me know in your comments below what your choices would be, and respond to any of my picks, how you feel about them if you've seen them. So before I start, I will just say then I am basing this on UK releases, so basically films I've seen at the cinema this year, films that have been released in the UK this year. So some of the choices, if you're watching this video in America, some of them might have come out last year in America, or if you're in a different country, it might have come out last year or a couple of years ago, or something like that. It does vary country from country, certain release dates, but I think most of these would be 2019 the world over anyway. But there's certainly a couple of mine that they would have been 2018 elsewhere, but 2019 in the UK. So just to explain that, this is based on films I've seen this year and based on their UK release dates. So before I start, I'm going to do some honourable mentions, ones that were very close to making my list. And the first one of those is Booksmart. This only just missed out, and it's worth sort of mentioning this film just because it seems to be a really promising time for coming of age movies. Last year you had Lady Bird with Saoirse Ronan, directed by Greta Gerwig, which was a big awards contender. I really enjoyed that film, really liked it a lot. And well, there's another one which I won't say because it's gonna come up on my list, but yeah, it does seem to be an exciting time. Also, The Hate U Give, which came out last year as well, really powerful, really impressive teenage story about racial tensions in the States. Really did a good job of being, on the one hand, quite a mainstream film, which was accessible, which was important to sort of get the story across to as bigger audience as possible, but at the same time it didn't sugarcoat the message. It was still very powerful, told a very important story with a lot of emotion and depth. But so it seems to be a really, because it seems like it's been a number of years since we've really got these really important coming of age type tales. that can speak to, this sort of current generation. And, fingers crossed that does seem to be coming back. Some of the recent, I'd say, best films of the last few years have sort of been in that mould. And Booksmart was very, very good as well. You obviously have Kate. Sorry, almost forgot her name. Caitlin Danver, who was so brilliant in Unbelievable, the Netflix miniseries which I reviewed. She was also in Short Term 20, which I need to catch up on. Or is it 19? One, two. But I hear really great things about that. And she's an emerging actress. Also, the other actress whose names I forget now, but she was also in Lady Bird, actually, in quite a small part. But she plays the other lead in Booksmart. And about, two teenagers about to graduate. And they've kind of got this reputation as kind of being, then they don't have enough fun. They're sort of seen as being really into their study and really focusing on that, and that they're kind of seen as being uncool or not having enough fun as a result. So they're kind of, they're kind of in this sort of niche little group which is quite cut off from the rest of the school. And so that leads to them on their last night before they kind of graduate and go their separate ways. It sort of leads them to like just let him rip and go into all these parties. And it's quite an elaborate sort of plot where they intend to go to this one party, but which is meant to be the coolest in town, and they have to find directions. They have to find their way to the party itself. And there's various like detours and them going to like the wrong party and stuff. And it's a really good device for the film because they have different encounters with different, college students along the way, people they've sort of known but they don't really know. And they sort of, like the Caitlin Denver character sort of finds her sexuality, finds herself. But it's a really clever device for a coming of age drama / comedy because it's just set mostly over the one night, and it's them going from location to location, and you get recurring like jokes with characters. Like there's this one character who sort of shows up at every party they go to. And is sort of in a different sort of outfit. And she's a really good sort of funny comic relief character. But yeah, it's a really powerful film. There's really the performances are naturalistic. They have really good chemistry. The comedy is fantastic, but it feels like the way it's captured is very raw and realistic. It's captured in a very like kind of awkward, gross out type moments, but really encapsulates the experience of being young and finding yourself sexually, finding yourself as people in general. So it does flip between, the kind of really awkward humour, but then something a bit more like humanistic and tender, and then laugh out loud. It is a very funny movie. It is sort of more on the comedy side, but it's a very genuine movie. The performances are great. They have good chemistry. You believe in them as being best friends, but you get the really good character growth over the course of the film. Certainly one of the best comedies of the year, and you get good supporting characters as well. It's a really fun ride, very funny, but very true to life as well, I think. And I think most crucially, you get people cast who feel like real teams. They come across as being quite realistic, which isn't always the case. I mean, I think Caitlin Denver is sort of in her early 20s, like 22, 23. So she's a bit out of the age range, but she certainly looks realistic that she could be that age. And she's a real natural performer, so you believe her all the way through. But yeah, it's a film that has a lot of fun with its premise, but does have tender moments as well. Really impressive. Booksmart, which was very close to making my list. Another film which just missed out is a Chinese film called Ash is Purest White, and film which, from the director, I've seen a lot of his films. A Touch of Sin, he did really, really good. Still Life, I believe, a really impressive film from just over 10 years ago, but done a lot of impressive stuff. So this is kind of a gangster type movie that is set over a number of years, and it's one of these. It's really down and dirty and very gritty and has this earthy sort of aesthetic. But at the same time, there's a real poetry and a real style to the visuals as well. And you have really well written sort of characters, and it's kind of a genre film, but also kind of has a message and kind of has a heart to it. But yeah, it's a pretty tough going film. It's pretty full on at times, but really impressive bit of filmmaking. Ash is Purest White, I recommend checking out. Another film which just missed the cut is Transit. So this is a German movie, and it's about an immigrant who's sort of in between being like deported, and he essentially is offered a way out as a job, sort of transporting this like famous writer on a train, and so they're traveling kind of illegally in one of like the carriages, so it's like a cargo type train, and along the way the writer dies, so then he has to connect with the writer's like family, and then he's kind of gets stranded in a city where the writer's family live. And he kind of gets involved with a woman who is trying to escape like he is, and she has like a doctor, is like married to a doctor who's very rich, but ultimately kind of discards her and doesn't treat her right. And that's the basic setup, but it goes into sort of all kinds of like directions and areas which kind of play with like cinematic conventions and styles and genres like film noir and melodrama and sort of a thriller. It has these really tender humanistic moments, but then other moments where it really races up. It really cranks like a thriller, and it sort of plays with your expectations. It's sort of open to your interpretation how much of this is in his head and how much is real. So along the way, because he's essentially like reading the author's like novel, so the way it plays out is then there's like these similarities between what's happening to him and in the story. So it becomes that sort of meta sort of thing where a lot of this might be just part of the story. It might be him imagining it rather than it actually happening. But it sort of plays with that and does really clever things with that premise. Really stylish, really gripping and engrossing, really interesting characters, tender performances. Really impressive film. That's Transit, which again was close to making my top 10. Also close were two comic book movies. So first of all, Avengers Endgame, the big climatic to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or at least to this phase. 11 years in the making, over 20 films. And it really blew me away. Even though it was close to 3 hours, I thought it really justified those 3 hours. And, I speak as someone who isn't the target audience for Marvel films, and yet it just captivated me and swept me along. I got emotional watching it. I was engaged with what was happening, with all the twists and the big reveals. It impressed me that it wasn't afraid to, without giving away spoilers, although a lot of people will know by now anyway, but it wasn't afraid to kill off key characters, big characters. There was some really good twists and turns, a lot of good comedy, which you tend to get in these movies, but some real great emotional highs as well, and a fantastic cast, of course. I mean, this is one of the best casts you'll really see in a movie, so it really impressed me. I mean, I think for for hardcore Marvel fans, I can kind of see how maybe it might not be that great, or it might not live up to some of the other Marvel films. But as someone who's more casual as a Marvel fan, then it really did the trick for me. It really ticked all the boxes. So I liked it a lot, and also I really liked Captain Marvel, which was the first Marvel film of the year. Brie Larson appearing for the first time as a female Captain Marvel did a fantastic job. I really enjoyed the time travel plot. I really enjoyed the sort of retro stuff, the style of it. I just loved the whole scene with her crash landing into a Blockbusters. And she was great. The de-aging was great on Samuel L. Jackson. That worked really well. Good supporting cast, and I just loved the sort of feminism with the particular picks on the soundtrack. The fact it was set in the 90s, and you had a soundtrack including the likes of Hole and Garbage. Really, really clever stuff. A really satisfying blockbuster with good character depth. So there you have it. Captain Marvel really impressed me too, as did High Life, a very different sort of film. This science fiction art house style movie from Claire Denis, or Denis, I'm never quite sure how you pronounce the name, but a really ambitious, broad film, very daring, very dark at times. Really good performance from Robert Pattinson, and oh my god, the scene 40 minutes in with the sex chamber, that has to be seen to believe. One of those what the fuck moments of 2019 in cinema. So High Life I liked a lot. It felt very much like an old school science fiction, based on ideas type film, but also did some of its own stuff. It looked really fantastic. So High Life, really worth tracking down. So those are my near misses. They were close to getting on the list. So without further ado, my top 10 movies of 2019 in reverse order. So at number 10, we have one which was an awards contender earlier in the year, and it is Can You Ever Forgive Me? So starring Melissa McCarthy and Richard E. Grant. Grant got an Oscar nomination, as did McCarthy, but I think everyone was really rooting for Grant to get a win because he's just so well loved, and and it was a great story, him getting an Oscar. I think he'd got one before, but it was like years ago, and who knows, he might not get another one. You don't see him in that many films nowadays, and he was particularly picky about this because I think when they pitched it to him, he was a bit concerned that it would be the typical Melissa McCarthy style comedy, but then he could see when he read the script and the tone of it, then it was very different. So it's based on true events, but it has this broadly black comedy sort of feel where McCarthy plays like this sort of fraudster who goes around bookstores with like basically signatures of famous authors. So she has them like on books or wherever, and she's basically learned how to like copy their signature. So it's like a fraudulent signature, and that's kind of how she makes her sort of money. And along the way, she meets like this drunken character played by Richard E. Grant. They meet in a bar. They start clicking, and they're almost like the opposite of each other. But they just have this chemistry and this bond. And along the way, you know, he starts encouraging her, you know, with her kind of fraudster sort of career, but also as the film goes on, she gets into more and more trouble where people start realizing what she's doing, and she ends up, you know, being investigated by the FBI and what have you, and that's kind of where the film leads. So many things to say about this. I mean, the script is really, really sharp. It's really this sort of sharply observed sort of black sort of humour, very sort of believable. You really believe in the relationship. You believe in a lot of the banter and dialogue back and forth between them. I really like the script writer. She's directed a lot of her own films. I really recommend Lovely and Amazing, for example. She's almost like a Woody Allen style director slash writer, but she does it from the female perspective. But yeah, really sharp black humour, really realistic and raw dialogue that it feels they could really have. The two performances are really, really good. They have good chemistry. I think credit to Melissa McCarthy, because she does have this reputation of sort of only appearing in those sort of really wacky, you know, sort of gross bridesmaid style sort of comedies. But this film really proves that she can play it straight and be very effective. I mean, there's a lot of comedy in it, but it is very black sort of comedy. But she really transforms herself. She looks very different in this film. It's a much more like subtle, naturalistic sort of performance. It's also a really good New York film. Because you see this in film where you get like these exaggerated versions of New York. You know, you get either it being really glamorized, or you get maybe the down and dirty, rough style of New York, which you had in like 1980s sort of films. But yeah, here it really captures the urban sort of flavour of New York. It really feels very realistic. It feels like a good middle ground between those two extremes. It really captures the life of New York. You know, at one point they go off and they go to like a drag sort of bar and they're watching an act, and it really captures, you know, the culture and the character of the city. So I really appreciate that. Some really good uses of music. I really like the use of like the Lou Reed song, Good Night Ladies, at the end, off his Transformer album. That's plays out over the end credits. So it's a really, really sharp, realistic film, very, very funny as well, very tender. And I was really engrossed in the world and in the characters of the film. And it does have a life to it. You know, it's one of these that could have just ended up being quite sort of dry and flat and just kind of ticking the boxes the way a lot of Oscar-nominated films do, but it really felt diverse. It really felt sort of sparky and interesting, and a bit more than that. So I really liked it a lot, and I sort of thought it got a bit underrated, sadly. Really fine performances, as I said. So that's Can You Ever Forgive Me, my number 10. And my number 9 is a film I actually reviewed here on the channel, I think a couple of months ago now, not too long ago anyway, and that is Ready or Not. So it's sort of a horror comedy with Samara Weaving, who some people know from The Babysitter, that Netflix movie. And she is sort of whisked away to like the country like mansion of her fiance. They're about to get married, and it's the first time she'll be meeting his parents before the wedding. They're getting like married sort of like the next day or on that day. So there's this awkward sort of atmosphere with the parents. You can tell they're almost like sort of like this oddball like Addams Family type family, where you could tell there's tension or something going on in the background. But anyway, on the night of their wedding, it's revealed to the lead character, the Weaving character, then the family has this tradition where you sort of have to play a game on the night of your wedding, like an initiation sort of game. And in this case, it turns into a hide and seek game. And then that turns into basically them, the whole family going after her, trying to kill her. And the reason for this is because there's this long curse that goes back through the years, where if someone isn't killed, if like the new member of the family isn't killed, that the whole family dies, sort of thing. So it's this really fun, simple premise. It's kind of like this murder mystery style plot almost. It has that Agatha Christie type of feel with it all being, like sort of condensed to like this mansion, mixed with obviously this really fun, hard-hitting like horror sort of comedy. It has an Evil Dead type thing. You get a lot of really fun slapstick moments that are often like pitched between horror and comedy. Really good like effects, really good gore moments. They really make them count. They really build to them, so they're not just rushed in. They really feel really well earned. Samara Weaving is fantastic. She's an absolute natural. She has a lot of fun in the role. And I think what was really refreshing about it is just the way her character grew over the course of the film. So she can play both sides really well. She can play the sort of like fun, feisty girl next door who's quite sweet and charming, and you can see why the guy would fall in love with her. But also you can see that more tough, gritty sort of side as well, and she gets to be a badass. She really grows into that. She's almost like, it has this Buffy sort of feel to it, where it has a feminist sort of twist where she turns the tables on the people trying to kill her. But it's a really entertaining film. Some really great set pieces. It does something really exciting and fun with the premise. And just as a horror, I mean, horror and comedy together is a really hard trick to pull off, and I think this did it really well, so that really impressed me as well. I had a blast. I mean, in terms of seeing something at the cinema, I think this was one of my most enjoyable cinema trips this year. I can't wait to revisit. So as a horror fan, it really satisfied me. So that's why it's my number 9. At number 8, going a bit earlier in the year now, a film called The Destroyer. And speaking of horror movies, this film, The Destroyer, actually comes from the director of The Invitation, which came out a few years ago, film you can see on Netflix. The Invitation is this really psychological horror, all set over one dinner at like this house, this gathering with all these twists and turns. Really, really good film, really full of surprises and suspense. Some great casting as well. But this is the director's most recent film, The Destroyer, with Nicole Kidman on fantastic form. She's really having another sort of career revival, Kidman, but she's the perfect lead in this, and it's like this neo-noir sort of 70s style thriller with this really gritty, nasty sort of look to like the streets. It's very retro, very throwback to like the French Connection and those sorts of films you got in the 70s, where the streets and their aesthetic, they really played that. They're sort of like a character themselves in the film. Kidman completely transforms herself, really, really impressive. And she plays like, I think her physicality is really important in the film because she plays like this sort of kind of washed up detective police officer who's, you know, an alcoholic, a real sort of drunk, and she really sells that perfectly with her body language and, you know, just the little touches in her face and the way she carries herself. And at the start of the film, we see her at like a crime scene, and she's just staggered to it, drunk, and there's a dead body there, and like she's being mocked by the detective, and he's on the scene, and he's kind of saying, you know, just go home and sleep it off, sort of thing. We've got this controlled. We've got this underhand. And as she's walking away, she mentions how she knows who did it. And that's kind of the way you get into the film, because then it flashes back and forth between her in the past and now investigating the case. And it's skillfully handled, because sometimes it feels a bit jarring when films go back and forth like this, but it actually handles it really well. And it justifies it because everything you see in the past has a purpose. It means something to what's happening now in the present. So I won't go into too many spoilers, but basically it shows her in the past where she got involved in this drug sort of like gang, and it led to sort of her being involved in this robbery. And that kind of has a connection to what's happened in the present and the murder. So it goes back and forth. As I said, Kidman on top form. She really carries the film. She's in pretty much every frame. Strong supporting cast. Toby Kebbell, who people would have seen in the Planet of the Apes films. He was also in Dead Man's Shoes many years ago. Really, really fine actor. Has a real presence. You've got Tatiana Missleri, I believe you say her name, in a small role, but she's really good. She's amazing in Orphan Black, the Canadian sci-fi show, one of my favourite shows of recent years, but really, really good actress, very underrated. She's in here on a small role, so strong supporting cast as well, but it's just the style and the mood that really carries you in, really immerses me in the world of the film. Really atmospheric, really powerful and chilling. The plot is slowly paced, and it really benefits from that. Those developments really add to what's gone before and really builds over the film. Some great suspense. Oh, Bradley Whitford's in there, another fine choice in the casting. But it's really the sort of throwback film you don't see enough of. I loved the synth score as well. That was really effective. But a real gem, which again sadly got overlooked, but very distinct, very cult sort of feel to it in many ways. And I highly recommend it. It's called The Destroyer. or just Destroyer actually, and it's fantastic. It's you can find it on Netflix or UK Netflix. It's out on DVD now, but for people in the UK, it's now on Netflix. It may well be on US Netflix and other areas, but it's certainly on UK Netflix. Destroyer is my number 8. My number 7 is If Beale Street Could Talk. So it's the latest film from Moonlight director Barry Jenkins, Moonlight, which of course won Best Picture a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 now. And this is his follow-up, and again it deals with sort of racism, and it deals with a coming-of-age sort of tale with a sort of an emerging sort of couple, and so it deals with first love and emotions and their kind of working class sort of setting, but it also deals with the barriers put on their relationship and their lives because of the racism around them and the pressure on them not to see each other and various sort of things. But a bit like Moonlight, it's just this beautiful sort of poetic sort of film that really, I mean, he's a true sort of auteur, I think, really, Jenkins, in the way he builds up emotion, builds up mood from the grounds up. He does it with the music, with the setting, again talking about Destroyer, but setting is so important to cinema. This sense of location, this sense of atmosphere, and the sort of very naturalistic sounds and moods and use of pop music is very evocative in this movie. The performances are really, really impressive. They really hold the film together. They engage you emotionally. They feel like regular sort of teenagers. And again, it just tells an important story about racism and this sort of cautionary tale of the age we're now in, and some of the anxieties that are going on at the moment, not just in America but around the world, but particularly in America at the moment, and the history. And it's a really beautiful, moving, very, very sad but also poetic sort of film, as I said. Really beautiful stuff. Very impressive. I think it's right up there with Moonlight actually. But that's Barry Jenkins' latest, If Beale Street Could Talk. Really fine performances. I know Regina King was nominated. I believe she won for Best Supporting Actress, so that's really well deserved, I think. Should have got more nominations. I think it only got 2 or 3 in the end. Really impressive cinematography. And I think Barry Jenkins is really one to watch. So If Beale Street Could Talk is my number 7. Number 6, another important contemporary tale, and that is this Lebanese film called Capernaum. So I'll just spell that for you. It's Capernaum. That's Capernaum. And it's the latest from Nadine the Brachy. And she did a film I really liked about 10 years ago called Caramel, which was about these 3 women who all worked in like a hair salon, and it was about their individual stories, and it really captured like the city and their locations, and really came across as a very feminist film, very relatable to the female experiences, and particularly in this city. And this one again feels very important, very contemporary. It's this really shocking story of a boy who is raised in poverty. His parents essentially neglect him, so he is left to fend for himself and fend for his sister. And the way the film opens, which really confronts you with what the film is dealing with, is that he has stabbed someone and he's now on trial. Obviously, there's complications because he's a young kid. He's about 8, I think, and he kind of, his whole speech is that he wants to sue his parents because that for giving life to him, basically, bringing him into such a crazy, mad sort of world. So that's kind of the ironic sort of thing on it, but it's really confronts you with the issue, the fact that this kid not only has to fend for himself, his sister, where his parents aren't, they're not facing up to their responsibility, but the fact he's only 8 and has all this on his shoulders. So the film then goes into flashbacks and it shows what leads up to him stabbing this guy, this person, and it goes through the whole scenario. And again, it beautifully captures like the mood, the atmosphere of the city. Very tender the way it's shot. A lot of close-ups, a lot of very almost docu style sort of direction. Has that very naturalistic sort of feel to it. Very gritty. The young boy is fabulous. It's a really natural performance. Really disciplined for such a young actor. It's not just that he's just acting his age almost. He really has these really subtle sort of mannerisms and really a broad performance across the film. But just a sad film, very eye-opening as well. It really makes you think. And for someone seeing it in the UK, as someone said to me when we came out the film, we don't know the half of it. And we really don't. We have a lot of issues in this country, but sometimes we do need to thank our stars in some ways when you see the situation in these other countries. As I said, this is set in Lebanon, and it's a really, really powerful, beautiful film that just makes you think. A really well-crafted story. I think the other thing to say, it does feel like a piece of cinema. It does have that really tense thriller sort of feel as well. So that's important as well. It's one thing to be bleak and powerful and kind of tell this important human story. But, you do have to work as a piece of cinema. You have to make it dramatic as well. And this film definitely does that. To be honest, I'm not sure how often I would watch it because it is really heavy going and bleak, but really, really good film. I highly recommend it. That's my number 6, which is Capernaum. And that's another director, Nadine Lebricki, really worth watching out for her films. So Capernaum at 6. So we're into the top 5. And a recent release which has just gone on to Netflix, it is Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. So this felt like a really big deal. It initially had a smaller cinema release. I saw it actually on the premiere date when it basically premiered at the closing night of the London Film Festival, and it was broadcast around the UK to certain cinemas. So I saw it that night, and it's this collaboration with Netflix. They provided him with all the funding, and now it's gone on to Netflix, so that's a good platform for many people to see it. It's the way cinema is going, with the really big auteur directors like Scorsese just being given the creative freedom which he otherwise would struggle to have with major film studios. So it feels like a really good collaboration. But a significant film because, it reunited him with De Niro for the first time in ages. He finally convinced Joe Pesci to come out of retirement for it. He asked him a number of times. Harvey Keitel appears briefly in it. He's another big Scorsese collaboratee, if that's a word. Um, so, and Al Pacino, who remarkably Scorsese had never worked with, he plays Jimmy Hoffa in the film, so he appears for the first time. And really impressive cast all the way down. Stephen Graham's in there, Anna Paquin, Ray Romano's good in a small role. So really, really well cast. Based on the true life story, a period piece, a lot of jumping back and forth, but really good. Like again, sort of like aging technology, where you see like this character, the De Niro character, over many periods in his life. They handle that very, very well. I did a full review. You can find that on the channel. So I mean, I'm not going to go into that much detail, but you know, for a director, Scorsese, who has kind of been hit and miss lately, and not, you know, very rarely do you see him sort of totally fire in on Full Cylinders, but this was him back to his form. It felt like a special film, him bringing these guys back together, and that plays into the sentiment and the themes of the film, because it is spread over most of like the lead character's life. So it felt very sort of poignant, the fact that he was potentially saying goodbye to these actors who have meant so much to him, and he shared so much with them. It's a very moving and profound film, as well as being a very gritty and stylish film, really immersive. It's really a great one to see at the cinema, although because of the length, some people would maybe prefer to see it on Netflix. But it absolutely justifies the length. It kept me wrapped up. The characters are really, really well written. Tremendous performances across the board. Pesci really impressive in this much more sort of toned down performance, really, really subtle. Almost the power of language is how his character expresses himself, and just this gentle sort of power. He's a lot more cerebral in the way he manipulates situations. But yeah, the whole cast are really, really impressive. Beautiful use of music. The soundtrack is just fantastic. It's really, really a masterclass. It's epic. It's subversive. It's very, very funny. The humour is a lot more sharp than you'd think, but it comes from a very real place. It feels like realistic conversation. You know, each scene is allowed to build and take its time, and it feels very raw and organic. But a beautiful, tough, scary film, very epic, very cinematic. It feels like Scorsese back to his best, and I would comfortably put this in his top 5 films, I have to say. I've only seen it once. I'm going to go back and watch it, but certainly on the first viewing I was really, really impressed. So great to have Scorsese back on form. That's The Irishman, my number 5. So on to number 4, and we're back to the horror genre. As you know, I'm a big horror fan, and this satisfied me tremendously. It is Us, the latest from Jordan Peele, who I think is one of the great emerging talents in the horror genre. Of course, he really wowed people with Get Out a few years ago now, big awards contender. But did something very interesting and contemporary with the horror genre, really satirical sort of horror. I think Us was a more straight horror. It's basically the story of this family. You have the Peter Longer, who's like the mother of the family, of the children, and obviously wife, and they go away to this retreat. There's a bit of tension in the relationship between man and wife, husband and wife, so that they're going away to like this beach-like resort to try and get a well-deserved break and sort of ease out the tension. And then people along the way, people show up who look identical to them, so you get like a doppelganger sort of thing going on. And there's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of twists and turns, and really plays with imagery, and it's very, very stylistic, very sort of atmospheric. Has this twisted sort of feel to it where there's quite a lot of gore, but it doesn't overdo it. But the moments of gore really feel satisfying. They really hit you hard. There's a real sort of style to them, and really distinct use of sound. Some great kills, but very, very intense. Once you get into the main horror plot, it keeps you on sort of tenterhooks all the way through, or it did with me. A fascinating idea. I mean, as I said, it's more of a straight horror, less of the themes and the satire of Get Out. But I think there are ideas in there if you look for it. Certainly the way it ends, like the interpretation. But I think what's good about that is those ideas just come out naturally from the horror. And that's something horror has always done. They've always, I think, as you move through the different decades and era, horror kind of holds up a compass or holds up a mirror to the times. So there are themes in there if you look for them. But if you don't, it doesn't really matter. You can just go along with it as a really good horror movie. And as a horror movie, it really satisfies. It has this really simplistic premise, which a lot of great horror movie does. It has the style, it has the visuals, it has the atmosphere, it has really good scares, twists and turns, really impressive. Great casting, great performances. I think that Peter Lelonga, who I talked about in Little Monsters recently, she's really shown what a diverse actress she is. She really holds it together. But the whole casting of the main family, because as I said, it is a doppelganger plot, so they essentially have to act two sides to their characters. So like with the husband, for example, his other side is very different to, because he's kind of the Joker in the film, the kind of almost like a sort of a doofus sort of layabout, but his other side is more dark and serious. So he did a good job. I think his name's Winston Duke. He plays both sides really well, and the children are fantastic. It's really hard to cast good child actors, but they did a good job. So the cast is really strong. You've got Elizabeth Moss in a supporting role, and it's really grueling. The ending is just fascinating, like this really riddle where it leaves it open to your interpretation of what actually happens, and a lot of the best films do that, so that's really impressive. The soundtrack is fantastic. I've talked about music a lot in this video, but the soundtrack is really, really well used. Some great choices. They really put a subversive element on. They really set the tone and the atmosphere. Brilliant use of Fuck the Police by Public Enemy. That scene is just hilarious. It's almost like a shocking scene and a funny scene all in one, but one of the best soundtracks of the year. Another great soundtrack. But yeah, Us was absolutely not killer. When I left the cinema, I remember I just felt like my brain had dropped out of my head. It's a real mind fuck of a movie, but really, really exciting, really stylish, a great idea, and it delivers on all fronts as a great horror movie. So I really, really love it. I've only seen it once, so it's hard to say if it's up there with Get Out as good. I think that's a movie I've seen a number of times now, and I think it holds up as a modern classic. I've only seen Us once, so it's hard to say if I would, if that stands up to being as consistent as Get Out. But really impressive, and it's in my top 4, so I must like it. That is Us, which is out on DVD now. Jordan Peele's latest. And into the top three now, and my number three film, it's a Colombian film, so another art house movie, and it is called Bird of Passage. And this is another sort of period piece where it follows like this particular family who are like the head of the family is like involved in the drug cartel. He's like the head of the business, and it follows them over like the 1960s, 1970s. So basically, them on the rise and then ultimately on the fall. And I think what I really liked about the film partly was just the fact that it. I think the fact that it really engages in the spirituality of the culture of the people, and so it as well as having like this sort of like crime type plot or this sort of serious drama, it also has like this ghost story going on, this spirituality where these characters are suddenly they're being killed, but there's like this spiritual element, there's suggestion of like ghosts kind of cursing them, and it plays both sides really, really well. It feels like it is the same film. It does a really good job of bringing them together. It's another one that leaves you open to think almost, but it really goes deep into the culture and feels like a satisfying explanation of that. Really, really stylish, really chill in atmosphere, very slow moving, but again, the pacing I think really lends itself to the drama of the film. Fascinating characters, real suspense, but I think it does have that otherworldly, worldly sort of feel because of the ghost plot. That does work very well. The spirituality, the culture, it does feel like an alternative culture to that you're used to seeing on film, and certainly different from a lot of Western culture. Really powerful, moving film. It has a very nihilistic sort of tone at times a very hard-hitting worldview, very quite cynical in a way, but really good characters that you can get invested in. Really powerful atmosphere. Again, the setting really important. Really plays with your expectations and twists and turns, but very, very naturalistic and powerful and raw. And yeah, makes you think. It really, really engrossed me, but very impressive film. It's called Bird of Passage. And actually, one of the actresses in it she was in the new Terminator film, the recent Terminator film, and even though I wasn't that hot on that, I thought she did a really good job in that, so great to see her in a couple of films this year. But Bird of Passage, really, really strong, and one you'll have to seek out because it's more of an art house release, but yeah, it's out there now, it's out on release. So on to my number two, and that is, I was talking about having another sort of coming of age tale out there and on my list, and it goes in very high. This is Eighth Grade. So a film which got some awards recognition. It got some Golden Globe nominations. I think the young actress won a Golden Globe, in fact, very well deserved. Issa Fisher, her name is, a newcomer. So this film, Eighth Grade, deals with the very important and pressing issue of mental illness, mental health, which is a very overlooked problem in our society. So you have the protagonist, as I said, played by Issa Fisher. She lives at home with her father, who's essentially a single parent, and you have their kind of relationship where she's constantly off in her own world. There's a disconnect between her and her father. She spends a lot of time on like one of her devices, but it deals with her mental illness and her awkwardness around other like teenagers. She has to move to another school at various times, and it's just, at one point she's kind of taken in by this group, and there's this excitement of being with new people and feeling that she's part of it, but then there's complications and issues that go along the way. And I think it does what a really great coming of age movie should do, and that is just get inside the headspace of a teenager and really captures the raw emotions and the anxieties. And I think what's amazing about the film and the atmosphere is that a lot of scenes are played out as if they're coming from her point of view, her head, her eyeline, as she watches things playing out. And a lot of scenes, like a scene at this like pool party sort of thing when she's round a friend's house and there's this guy who she's attracted to, that just plays out in slow motion as she's watching it, and he's coming in and she's obviously being drawn towards him, but at the same time there's this other stuff going on around her, and it just has this surreal feel which feels very true to life, very captures the anxiety and the emotions that she goes through, and just how strange and scary it must be someone of her age in the modern world. And that's the important thing to say about these kids growing up nowadays. It's easy to rag on them, it's easy to criticize them and pick apart every little thing they do, say they're lucky to have what they have, but it's sort of that criticism and that level of scrutiny which partly make their life so hard in the first place. It adds all this pressure that wasn't there years ago with kids. I'm not old, I'll have to say, but it's sort of I'm lucky enough to probably be from a time where there wasn't this level of scrutiny, there wasn't all this overload of information through technology and everywhere else. And this film really captures that. It really captures like this character's headspace and the complex emotions he's going through. Again, like Booksmart, I mean, it's a more dramatic, more serious film than Booksmart, but it does have subtle moments of humour weaved in, and those scenes are really well judged. You get like this balance where a scene will start off with some humour, and you do get light-hearted sort of jokes or remarks, but then it has this uneasy sort of transition into something potentially dark or more serious. And it just feels very raw and realistic in that it feels like how a lot of, situations would play out in real life. So it captures the emotion, it captures the headspace of this teen. Very, very stylish. Very good use of like pop music as a backdrop or as an atmosphere. You're very much in her head, in her world. I really love the relationship between her and the father, because he's this character who just has this like really interesting transformation where he's kind of like this nerdy sort of dad, very sort of geeky. He's kind of clueless at the beginning. He doesn't really know how to act around her, and he usually falls flat on his face. And I think at the start of the film you kind of think then he's kind of like just this loser who's not a very good dad. But over the course of the film you can see that it comes from a good place. You can see he does care and he is doing his best. And I mean, over the course of the film they do start to connect more. So it's a really nice little relationship that sort of changes over the course of film, and he's actually a surprise as a character, but he's good. But Elsa Fisher is just amazing. I mean, again, I was talking about the young actor in Capernaum earlier, but here's an actress who it's she just feels like such a realistic sort of teen, where it's not just that she's just doing what you would expect a teen to do, and it's not just then it's being captured in that way where she's very just behaving in that way. It's then she has those subtle little like awkward sort of pauses in her dialogue. She has like the shrug of the shoulders, um, the whole body language, subtle facial expressions, can do so much with very basic stares or expressions or frowns. She's outstanding. I mean, based on this film, she should have one hell of a career. She's just one of the best performances I've seen in the last few years. She's fantastic. Really should have been recognised at the Oscars, but it's a really powerful and poignant modern film. Tells a very important story, and I believe I've said this before. I'll say it again. It should be taught in schools. It should be shown in school. This is a really important teaching lesson for modern teens, and a real wake up call. It actually shows people who rag on kids and say, "Oh, you're so lucky, you know, you don't have the stresses or we had." It actually shows you how hard modern life is for these teenagers, and it just should raise awareness of the issue of mental health, which is just being ignored way too much in our society. So outstanding film. It really one of the most emotional experiences I'll have in a cinema, I think, ever. That's how just engrossing and emotional it was, just how sad I got and angry at watching the film. You know, I don't cry very often. I did in this film, and it just devastated me walking out of the cinema. It is a very bleak and devastating film, but one you just have to see. It's very, very vital for our times. And that's the whole thing about coming of age films, is they really capture and encapsulate our times and the experience for that particular age group. And that's why it's such an important genre, or subgenre if you like. And this is right up there, 8th Grade. Fantastic film. You really, really have to see it if you haven't already. So my number two, and I just have to say it was very, very close between this and my number one. They were pretty much neck and neck. In fact, the only reason I went with my choice for number one and didn't go for 8th Grade was just because I've seen that one again. I've seen it twice, whereas 8th Grade I've only seen once. I think that may have just nudged it in its favour. My number one is a Korean film called Burning. And I mean, I'll get into why this is my best film of the year in a moment. I should mention that the director is, if I can find his name, the director is, Lee Chung-boon. Lee Chung-boon, the director, has a pretty impressive back catalogue. But it's based on a Murakami short story called Barn Burning from a collection called Elephant Vanishing Elephant. That's it, which I've read recently. Really good short story collection. But Elephant Vanishing is the name of the collection. Barn Burning, the short story, which it's based on. So the setup is then a young man bumps into a girl who he used to go to school with. He doesn't remember her, but she remembers him, and she kind of confronts him and says, "Hey, you know, you once called me ugly, you didn't want to go out with me. So she had an attraction to him, but him not to her, apparently. And she actually confronts him with the fact she's had like facial reconstructive surgery, so she has this new kind of beauty in her mind, which is partly, I guess, maybe why he didn't recognise her. But they start like sort of a casual sort of relationship. And then she says one day then she's going to Africa for a few months and she wants him to look after a cat. And there's sort of mystery surrounding the cat in itself, because when he goes to feed the cat, it's not there. He just leaves the food down. He never sees this cat, so he's wondering if the cat even exists. And then she comes back from Africa, but she comes back with another guy, this richer guy who she met out there, and they're now in a relationship. And the three of them start hanging out, but obviously the original guy, the main character, is very, very kind of put off and sort of upset about, her moving on to this other guy and her not really reacting to it, and they just go on as normal. But as I said, he does hang out with them and socialise with them. But then where the title of the film comes from is that the other guy, they're sort of high and hanging out one evening, and he sort of says to him, then he has this weird sort of hobby, which is like mapping out random barns and just burning them, setting them alight. And so it becomes this mission of the main guy to try and track down each barn and try and stop him from setting them on fire. He kind of says to him, yeah, the next barn I burn is going to be in this area, it's going to be close. So it becomes like this obsession with him, where he's looking for this barn. And so and that's as much of a plot spoiler as I can sort of give you. But so it's like this surreal mystery, really sort of stylistic, very playful, very interesting characters, really well acted, very slow moving again, but the pacing and the whole tension works very, very well. But I mean, the best thing I can say about it, and the reason I think it is my favourite film of the year, is just how much of a riddle of a movie it is, just how much of an enigma the film is. And just the fact that it plays with your mind so much, with your expectations, makes you question things. But it just has like this sort of, in many ways it's a simplistic film, but then it appeals to the mind, it appeals to the imagination, it appeals to, again, sort of leaving things open and for you to interpret, but these endless sort of possibilities that it just leaves the mind to race and question. It's got these themes to do with obsession, to do with class, to do with masculinity. There's almost like this sort of revenge style element a little bit with the girl now with, reconstructed facial surgery, sort of coming back as this more pristine, beautiful sort of girl. I think it sort of taps a bit into the culture with that. But yeah, her sort of throwing it more in his face, and now getting him hooked. And the whole idea is that she's very casual about their relationship, but he sees it more as like the real sort of deal. So I think the way she plays with him, you could almost see it as sort of a revenge from their like school days, if you like. But then that's what I love about this film. I love the fact that in every major element there's a question mark, there's another possibility. Did she really know him at school? is she messing with his head? Did she randomly come up to see him on the street just to play this game, just to hook this guy into her world, and then just to leave him dangling and just mess with him? All these little questions that the film doesn't answer, and it's a more powerful, provocative film as a result. So with the cat, that becomes a mystery, that becomes this dreamlike, surreal sort of riddle. And again, I can't really spoil much beyond what I've said, but that there is a significance with the cat later on. I'll probably maybe do a review of this film sometime, but there is like this big scene with a cat later on. So you're talking about great cinematic cats. I think this film has one of the best. But yeah, did she ever really have a cat? And then later on, I can't say too much, but the way this cat suddenly appears later in the film and the certain events that have happened, it makes you question. It's another real mystery. I will do a review because I think it will be good to talk about my theories. But yeah, there's a big plot development later in the film, which is kind of, again, it leaves you open. And I think this is the proof of this. Is I've seen it twice, and both times I had a different theory to the answer to the riddle, if you like. So it's almost like David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, where there is kind of a key riddle, a central riddle, and there's potentially an answer. But both times I had different interpretations of that answer, and I'll mention that actually when I do a review. And it's significant because me and my friend went to see it at the cinema, and we left just full of ideas, just full of theories, and it's telling them we both had completely different ideas about what the hell had happened, our theory to what had happened. So it's really, really powerful. It's really, really thought-provoking, stylish, fascinating characters, but it is the mysteries and the small details and the way your mind just races thinking, well, did this happen, did that happen, and all these different possibilities that maybe enter your mind. That's just the power of cinema and the power of storytelling. So that's why it's my favourite film of 2019. It has great rewatch value. I highly recommend it. It's now out on DVD. It is called Burning, and it's my film of 2019 by an inch. It just beats out 8th Grade. So I'll just run down those top 10 movies again, reverse order. So number 10, Can You Ever Forgive Me? Number 8, Ready or Not. Number 8, already ballsed up. Number 9 was Ready or Not. Number 8, Destroyer. Number 7, If Beale Street Could Talk. Number 6, Capernaum. Number 5, Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. Number 4, Jordan Peele's Us. Number 3, Bird of Passage. Number 2, 8th Grade. And number 1, again, was Burning. I think with the other lists, I'll actually, before I announce the number 1, I'll do the countdown up to 2 and then do number 1. But there you have it. So that's my top 10 movies of 2019. My top 10 movies of 2019, and I encourage you guys to give me yours in the comments below, like and subscribe, and comment on any of my picks. But I will be back in the next 2 to 3 days with my top 10 TV shows of 2019, so look forward to that. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.